what's going on with the case of the war, the current phase of the war in the Middle East? Iran is hitting Kuwait nonstop. They didn't stop for an hour, for minutes. They were attacking them, and the situation is getting so dire. One look at the 80%. I was checking in the last 2 days, more than 80% of the targets, 80% of the targets, Iranian targets in Kuwait are in Kuwait rather than in Bahrain or Jordan. They attack Jordan, as you know, they attack, that American base. We're going to talk about that. But before getting there, the the Patriot system was hit in Kuwait, and they're hitting the radars, all these depots in Kuwait, and the targets that they're considering as a strategic targets for Iranians as they talk about it. And just moments ago, the government in Kuwait has announced they summoned Iranian ambassador to Kuwait and giving them some sort of warning. And they said, we demand Iran to cease its unprovoked attack. Is unprovoked attacks. It means that
love that unprovoked.
It's so familiar, by the way.
We can attack you. Yeah, we can attack you through our surrogates, the United States of America and Israel, anytime we wish to. But dare you attack us back?
The perception, Larry, on the part of Iranians is that Kuwait is the front line. They're basically using the HIMARS in Kuwait. The air defenses mostly are in Kuwait, out of Jordan. Then after Kuwait, you go to Jordan, and
which is untenable now. Also,
yeah.
This is. I was listening to John Mearsheimer earlier this morning, and while I agreed with he was on Chris Hedges' show, and I listened and I agreed with most of what he said, except he didn't go far enough or deeply enough into what you and I were talking about some weeks ago. And that is that the Iranians don't just have one set of targets or two set of targets or three set of targets. They have a whole panoply of targets. And those targets are in every category of strategic targeting. And they have the missilery to hit those targets. And they have the Chinese overhead assets, and probably Russian too, necessary to hit those targets. And also, and this is very important because this is the supreme satellite capability at present time, if you will. They have the capability to ascertain changes in those targets. Daily, hourly changes in those targets as to whether or not this is moved there, or this is now protected, this is now vulnerable, whatever. This is real time, almost instantaneous intelligence from Chinese satellites. And I suspect Russian too, but I know about the Chinese. So what I said earlier to you about them having these second and third and even fourth and possibly other tier targets in mind is based on what we do to them. And they have been very circumspect, I think, to this point, and very prudent to not hit things like, for example, Fujairah, or work on Yanbu, or maybe even go after Ras Tanura or someplace like that, internal to Saudi Arabia's oil apparatus. They've not done that, except as we act to do things to them that they feel warrant doing that. So we're not even halfway there yet, I don't think, to that second, third, fourth, whatever tier of targets that the Iranians have in their plans, should we force them to go there. And the ultimate strikes, and this is one of the things I don't think John got to. He didn't have but the usual 50 minutes or so with Chris, but when they go there, it's going to be very unforgiving for the global economy. We're talking about, John was saying, and others have said too, and I agree with them, that we have so far through workarounds been able to massage the loss of maybe 7 or 8 million of the 20 million or so that usually flows through the strait. and to work around that, notwithstanding the fact that China could disturb it in a heartbeat if it suddenly decides to do what it could do, refill its strategic petroleum reserve, and then put a huge demand on global oil, or if something else were to occur that Iran decides to do, like going into more serious targets than even Fujairah or ultimately Yanbu in the Red Sea. If we do that, if we keep on what we're doing right now, escalation, 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 in terms of the kinds of targets that Iran has let us know categorically we shouldn't be hitting, indeed the kind of targets that are war crimes to hit, then Iran is going to take that circumspection and put it behind them, and it's going to start hitting these other targets. It knows when it does that, it's going to create some animosity across the globe that it's not creating right now, because it's confining its targets to the ones you just described: Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, and Jordan, and never to forget Kurdistan in Iraq, where the Peshmerga were probably being courted by the United States and Britain and Israel to attack in Iran. I don't think that's going to happen now, even from some really stupid people in northern Iraq. All to say that, and you've probably heard also that the Iranian militias in Iraq are now planning possibly to come south and to do what they can do to help Iran with regard to those countries that are still holding out barely: Bahrain, Qatar, UAE, Kuwait, maybe even Jordan. So I think we're looking at a real crunch point here right now that I don't see anybody other than J.D. Vance understanding on our side of the ocean, if you will. If we go ahead with the kind of things we started doing in the last 48, 96 hours, since we completely negated the MOU, we're going to get paid back in spades. I mean, it's going to, and the globe's going to suffer from it. I mean, we really could go into global recession and then maybe even global depression. So I don't think anyone, this is my dilemma, I don't think anyone other than possibly J.D. Vance understands this in Washington. It's a very careful game the Iranians are playing, a very smart game they're playing, a very strategic game they're playing. And they're doing their best, as Putin, with the special military operation Ukraine has done, to try and not do things that lead to escalation, whether in Ukraine it be actual NATO participation, which is really happening right now. If you look at it closely, we really are. NATO really is participating in the Ukraine war. Might not be NATO flags flying over the places we're doing it, but we're doing it. And Putin knows that. And in this case in Southwest Asia, the Iranians are being even more circumspect than Putin, because they just want to hurt the United States and anyone in the process of aiding majorly or substantially the United States, which is turning out to be most of the Gulf Cooperation Council countries. And they will take that further. And I've said that all along. They will take that further if they have to, and then they will be hurting the world. And they don't want to do that, I don't think. I think that's a last resort for them, but we have to always calculate, I think, that they would go that far if they had to. And then we're talking about creating the conditions, I think, truly creating the conditions, stretching all the way from, as I've said before, Ukraine to Southwest Asia for a global conflict. I don't think we understand that. I don't think we get the depth of it. You know, Vietnam, which John also talked about at length and very wisely, he did leave out a few things like the invasion of Cambodia that Nixon perpetrated, but he didn't have much time. It's like Vietnam, but it's in an enclosure in terms of the way Vietnam was. Vietnam was really about the United States and its stupidity, strategic and otherwise. And another thing John didn't talk about was the domestic situation. He made it look as if LBJ and George Ball and all the rest, McNamara, they all understood that they couldn't win. What he didn't talk about was LBJ understood that his signature program as president of the United States, the building of the Great Society, his signature program would fail if he were seen by both parties and by the American people as the person who cut and ran from Vietnam. So he was trapped. He was trapped in a clearly, in retrospect, strategic dilemma. If I cut and run from Vietnam, I lose my ability to influence the legislature and the American people to pass the Great Society, to put it in effect. So I'm going to stick to this war, and I'm going to kill some 50,000 Americans because of that. Domestic politics intervened. And when Nixon came in, Nixon tried to put a kibosh on that momentum and change the dynamics of the war by expanding it to Cambodia. Didn't work. And so Nixon got hounded out of office too, really. All to say that this is not the same situation. This has global implications. Not that Vietnam didn't have a few, but not these kind of strategic global implications, just as Ukraine does. We're staring a much wider, much more profound, potentially nuclear, ultimately, war in the face in both theaters, perhaps in both theaters near simultaneously. And we don't seem to understand that. And this administration has shown no capacity, other than maybe the vice president, to even be thinking about these dimensions of the strategic dilemma that Donald Trump's ignorance, stupidity, and selfishness has put us in.
You mentioned the pipeline of Saudi Arabia that goes to the Red Sea. We know that yesterday Yemen came out and put a blockade on Saudi Arabia. This is new to the conflict.
Right.
And there are two ways of dealing with that. One of them is getting back to the fight with Yemen, which finally it's going to get worse for Saudi Arabia and their economy. We know the Aramco, they have the history. They know how to hit Aramco. They did it before.
Right.
And they can hit the pipeline as well. And the way, if they back down somehow, it's not going to bring out it's not going to be a good picture for Saudi Arabia, because it seems that they're going to be humiliated by that. They don't want to be in that position. Well, how do you see the combination of the Strait of Hormuz and the Red Sea, the blockade on Saudi Arabia, which is part of, it was mentioned yesterday that it's going to influence the global oil market is something like 7%. It's huge,
Yes.
because of the supply is.
I did a tabletop exercise at what was then called the United States Institute of Peace several years ago, focused on the Red Sea. And the name of the tabletop, I might not remember it exactly right, but close enough to tell you how topical it was. Is the strategic cockpit of competition shifting? In other words, is it shifting from the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf to the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandeb? And the conclusion of that table, we had everybody there, Naaman. We had Marad, we had Lloyd's of London, we had AIG, we had the European Union, we had Britain and all the European countries individually. We had EUCOM, the United States Command in Europe. We had CENTCOM, the Central Command in the Persian Gulf, of course. And we had what was called PACOM, then Pacific Command, now Indo-PACOM. We had everyone there at this tabletop for 2 days talking about the shift in strategic competition that was headed our way from the Persian Gulf to the Red Sea. Well, some of the facts that flowed out in that tabletop game were stunning to a lot of the people there. For example, and I'm sure it's changed a bit since then, but this was a few years ago, but not that much. 60% of the world's commerce goes through the Bab el-Mandeb, through the Red Sea, through the Suez Canal, a little bit off to the Gulf of Aqaba or whatever that thing is that goes up to Eilat in Israel. But 60%, and it's everything. It's not just oil. It's 60% of the world's commerce. We then did a stubby pencil, and then someone brought out a really well done analytical report on what the cost would be to have to go around the Horn instead of going through the Strait of Hormuz or through the Suez Canal, or instead of going up to the Gulf of Aqaba and out through the port of Haifa or whatever. It was fairly substantial. I remember because I had just done a similar thing on the Strait of Malacca. And what we found with the Strait of Malacca was not so much change. A little bit more costly, a little bit more time to go around, if you will, and up the Chinese coast or into the South China Sea. Red Sea was disastrous. 60% of the world's commerce. And all to get to the point I'm trying to make, this will be worse than the Persian Gulf if it's affected. And what happened the last time we said we were going in with our tremendous naval power and make the Red Sea safe again for commercial traffic? We got kicked out. We got routed. We got sent home. We lost an F-18, I think, into the ocean. We had several hits. What if that happens again? What if we have both the Strait of Hormuz and the Bab el-Mandeb and the Red Sea and the Suez Canal cut off? I guarantee you we're headed for global recession at a minimum and depression at a maximum. And with a lot more damage to a lot wider range of commodity exchanges that normally take place on a relatively inexpensive or less expensive than going around the strait and such, or around the Horn. It'd be a disaster. And I think the Iranians and the Houthis know it would be a disaster, and they are prepared to create that disaster if they have to.
Larry, the attack on Jordan was something new. The way it wasn't something new in the way that Iran was attacking American bases in Jordan. It was something new because of the precision. The new sort of the Iran has hit the helicopters in the base, some fighter jets, refueling tankers, maybe, and the forces. It was reported on CNN that one of the Democrat congressmen, said that they're not receiving any intelligence from the Trump administration because they don't want to share anything with anybody.
Yep.
And in the last 2 weeks, at least, there were more than 100 casualties or wounded. Let's put it this way: wounded, and 4 of them were confirmed that they were killed, that they're going to get to the United States. But after all, there is no way to understand what is the number, what is the real number of what has happened so far.
This administration is doing nothing but lying about everything. I mean, if I had to put one sobriquet, if I had to put one descriptor on the screen for this administration in terms of information release, I would say lies. Across the board, lies. Pick your subject, I'll pick the lies. You don't know what's going on. I just read a report from 2 Republicans who are on the Defense Appropriations Committees. And essentially, what Hegseth told them about this latest $200 billion tranche that they're trying to get was simply that they're desperate. They're desperate. They're running out of munitions. They need to buy the munitions. They need to start production lines back up again and so forth. And when the Republicans on the committee, Democrats too, of course, got deeply concerned about what they were hearing, they shut up. Nothing more was forthcoming. And they have asked Republicans and Democrats alike for more details on why they need this extra money. Because after all, Nima, they already have about $1.6, $1.7 trillion. And they're asking for all of this extra money, and their desperate plea is that they're running out. Okay, if you're running out, why are you telling lies to the American people about the status of our forces? Because you are. The Wall Street Journal is full of it, the Washington Post, the New York Times. little bit is leaking out now, I think, about things like the effectiveness of the PAC-2 and PAC-3 and some of the other things that have been revealed. But by and large, the Congress is finally getting concerned about how the Pentagon is being run. And this war is prima facie, if not in your face and in your ear, evidence from the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff themselves that they don't know what they're doing. So put that as a backdrop for what we've just talked about in terms of no strategy and the strategy they do have, whatever it is, this business of war crimes now, that's their strategy, is war crimes, is as big a failure as any other. So we're on our back feet and we don't know how to get off of them. Trump is being roundly defeated by, let's put it this way, he's being defeated by the Ayatollah and by Iran, and he doesn't know what to do about it. He doesn't have any idea what to do about it. He's desperately now trying to back up and reconvene something that would look like a new productive capacity for a new memorandum of understanding. I don't think Iran's going to talk to him. I don't think they're going to talk to him at all. I think they've made that decision. They keep talking about the moderates and the hardliners, the moderates and the hardliners. I said to someone the other night, there are no more moderates and hardliners in Iran. They're only Persians, and they're steeled. They're steeled to defeat us regardless of the cost. That's what's happening in Iran. Not moderates, not hardliners, not IRGC, not Majlis, not the Guardian Council, not the Ayatollah. The Persian nation is steeled against us, period.
There are people, Larry, in Washington, as they call it, the Gang of Eight. They received some sort of intelligence from the Trump administration, and one of them is Mark Warner. He had an interview in the last 2 days. He said here is what he said about about the conflict, the war that Donald Trump is trying to continue.
To these soldiers. Remember, as we think about this 5-month war, this is a war of choice. As a member of the Gang of Eight, there was no imminent threat from Iran against America. So Donald Trump chose to go to war. It took him 2 weeks to lay out what he thought his goals were going to be. Let's go through those. Regime change, how are we doing there? We got a worse crowd than before. Getting the enriched uranium, well, it's still there. Matter of fact, it would take a minimum of 15,000 troops on the ground for a week to try to take these canisters, which are quite volatile, out of their bunkers. Getting rid of Iran's missile and drone capability. Obviously, we've not been successful there. And the thing, John, that makes me completely crazy is Iran has both missiles and they also have lots and lots of $50,000 drones that are very effective. We are using missiles that cost $2.5 million to shoot down those drones. President Zelensky, the only country that has devised a technique of counter Iranian drones, at $5,000, they've done it so effectively. They offered us all of that technology for free. And the Trump White House basically said to the Ukrainians, thanks, but no thanks. So we're behind on that as well. And then finally, on the Strait of Hormuz, I mean, I don't know what gas station the secretary is going to, but before the war, average price of gasoline in Virginia was $2.81. It is now back to $4. Diesel's at $5. I see no path in the short term how the strait is going to be settled. This war of choice has been a disaster. It has been a disaster militarily. It has been a disaster in terms of how we're viewed around the world. It has been a disaster to our friends and the allies who question whether we will keep our promises. I'm anxious, if it takes a classic Donald Trump move.
Yeah, he's just... Larry, one point that he has mentioned in his argument that Iranian enriched uranium, that stockpile. Israelis are somehow, as CNN reported, Israel believes that Iran moved not only its advanced centrifuges, but also part of its stockpile of highly enriched uranium to the underground facility, deep beneath the Pickaxe Mountain after last year, after 12-day war. This is again Israel coming in and talking about the Pickaxe Mountain. The Pickaxe Mountain, Larry, is made of granite. Granite is one of the hardest rocks that we have. Whoever knows geology understands how difficult is this sort of rock.
One reason why
And
the North Koreans like working with the Iranians.
yeah.
Back in the early 2000s when I was working the AQCon network. It's similar terrain, similar rock.
The reason I mention this because it means that you're not gonna go in with these B2, B-52 with these bunker busters trying to destroy that. You have to put troops on the ground if you decide to do that. And this is what Keith Kellogg and those generals are advocating for, putting troops on the ground. And he says that don't care about what's going on with the public opinion. Keith Kellogg yesterday said, don't care about what they're going. Go to the Strait of Hormuz, get some of these islands, and put pressure on Iran. Maybe later on you can go and take that enriched uranium. It's some sort of fantasy. I look at the situation he's describing. It means that it's a Hollywood movie or something like of that he's making for himself, and he doesn't explain the complexity of the Iranian train, of the Iranian society. You remember when they went to the southern part of Isfahan, General Kane said each and everybody with whatever they had was shooting at us. This is go ahead.
Oh, I got to go back to Mark Warner for a moment. We can take the general on too if you want, but I get a Christmas card from Mark Warner and his family every year. Beautiful Christmas card and everything. I haven't voted for him once. I haven't given him a single penny, and I'll tell you one of the reasons why. And I feel the same thing about Tim Kaine, my other senator, whom I used to give money to and used to vote for. Warner just demonstrated in his remarks, and I challenge you to go back and listen to him again and refute me on this, but he just demonstrated in his remarks how much a product of the U.S. security establishment, Democratic, if you will, meaning he's a member of the Democrat Party, that he is. Some of the remarks he made showed his own ignorance, showed his own stupidity, showed his own sign up to, and I know this because he's actually said it from time to time, the idea that Bill Clinton put into the legislation that declared Iraq and Iran perpetual strategic enemies and their regimes to be overthrown as soon as possible by whatever method possible. I mean, go back and listen to his remarks. Even though he is saying things that are legitimate and accurate with regard to the current administration, Donald Trump's approach to Iran in this stupid, insane war, he's still a product of the American machine. He's still a product of the empire. He's still very much a product of those Persians ought to be rid from the face of the earth. So his contention right now is not that healthy and not that powerful, because he is a product of that, as are all the Democrats. So I'm saying that just to indicate to you how sold the American establishment is, whether it's politically opposed to the current regime or not, how politically established it is to be against Iran in the United States. And that's part of what we're dealing with. I mean, even this contention now in the appropriations committees over the defense budget, using Iran and the lack of strategic foresight or even strategic policy in order to deal with it, even that contention is full of this kind of, but they ought to be taken down. They ought to be taken down. This is something that we've been trying to do since the revolution, and it's Democrat and Republican, and we'll spend any money we have to spend on doing that, even though it is now quite clear that this is insanity par excellence. And it's insanity partly because we have that attitude about this country. We have that attitude about that country. And Nima, that is fueling what we're doing as much as Donald Trump's insanity. And that's what makes it so profoundly difficult to deal with. is people like Mark Warner and Tim Kaine and the host of the congressional delegation, if you got them all out and asked them the question, should Iran go down? Should the regime be changed? They'd say yes. And we don't care how you do it, except you're spending too much money and we don't see any strategy. So that's part of the problem. The second thing I would say, and this gets to the general, is that I wonder every day, Nima, I wonder where the hell are the military people in the Pentagon or elsewhere at Central Command, at Indo-PACOM, wherever the ball is being handled and handled so poorly. Where are they? Who's telling these people that they are insane, that nothing is working, that the enemy, such as it is winning, that we are losing people all across the earth every day? I don't know if you saw that report that came out that said something like 62% of the world despises us now. I mean, and this was, what was it? Pakistan was something like 90% of those polled. South Korea was a huge percentage of those polled. They hate our guts. They think we're the greatest threat to their future in the world. That's what's happening right now. And this is ramifying that. This insane war against Iran is putting that in a package, tying it with a red ribbon and saying, China, you're the winner. You're the winner. Oh, by the way, yesterday, another report came out and showed how the attitude towards China is dramatically changing all across the world, led by Africa, because the world sees China as principally using its riches for development that helps them, whereas we're principally using ours to send bombs their way or sanctions their way. You can't make this stuff up. The empire, the American empire, is killing itself. It is committing suicide in front of the world. And the primary evidence, but it's only evidence because there's much behind this, is the Iran war. It's idiocy, it's insanity, it's incredible brutality. We forget, and Mark Warner forgets, and Tim Kaine forgets, and John Thune forgets, and Mike Johnson forgets. There are people under our bombs dying. There are children dying. There are nurses dying. There are women dying. There are teenagers dying. There are all kinds of innocent Iranians dying under this fuselage of bombs we're sending at them. Who cares? It's just like the genocide in Gaza. Who cares? Israel is in charge. Israel is all perfect, right? Can't do any wrong. Israel is becoming a pariah too. And we right with them. We are the pariahs of the world right now. And that's a huge component of this war that is going to haunt us to our degradation and ultimately to our ruin. And it's at Trump's behest right now. And I don't see any way with this demented individual in the White House and the crew around him like Laura Loomer and Steve Miller and others that we get out of this, particularly not as long as Netanyahu or someone like him, and I don't think he's going to be replaced by anyone but someone worse, is in charge in Israel. We're being led to the slaughter. We're being led to the slaughter by Israel. And everybody should know that by now. And we should see some Americans rising up to take some action against it. But do we? Not really. So what's going to happen? We're going to disappear from the world scene if we're not careful, and we're going to disappear in one of the most ignominious retreats in human history. That's how serious this is. I can't say it any more forcefully. That's how serious this is.